All right, it's 7 o'clock here. We'll get started here this evening. First of all, I want to thank everyone for showing up here this evening to talk a little bit about winter weather awareness. It's been a slow start to the winter weather season across the area so far, but winter's knocking on our doorstep. It won't be too long and we'll be dealing with snow and cold and some pretty tricky conditions across the area. Once again, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Matthew Dukes. I'm a meteorologist here at the National Weather Service. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the webcam here while we get started. Once we get into the slides and we get to the end of the talk, I'll turn the camera on and say goodbye to everyone. But for now, sit back and enjoy our little presentation here. It's going to last about an hour, so you can plan your time accordingly. All right, hold on just 1 second. I'm going to turn the webcam off. All right. Well, welcome once again. Winter Weather Awareness Talk 2021 version, hosted here by the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls. Once again, my name is Matthew Dukes, and we'll be walking through some different ways you're going to learn a little bit more about winter weather. You're going to learn about staying aware and prepared and how to do some things to help us out through the upcoming winter season. So a few things what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about the National Weather Service and why we're doing this. We're going to take a little bit of a look at our historical winter perspectives and what typically happens in a winter season here in the Northern Plains. We're going to learn a little bit more about how you can stay aware, you can prepare ahead of the winter weather events, you can stay safe during winter weather, and then what you should probably do after the storm affects the area. We're going to talk a little bit about measuring snow, one of those very important things that you can help us out here at the National Weather Service with your reports. We're going to wrap up, and I'm going to share a few resources here for you that you can continue to take what you learned today and apply during the winter season ahead. So a little bit about myself. Once again, my name is Matthew Dukes. I'm a lead forecaster here at the Weather Service office. I've worked in the Sioux Falls office since 2014, moving up here from the Kansas City area. Believe it or not, I was born and raised in the state of Wisconsin, so I'm very familiar with winter weather and cold conditions. I've experienced them for most of my lifetime. My interests here in the office are with communication and dealing with expressing some of the different ways we can communicate hazardous weather to the public. You're going to see a little QR code here on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. This will take you to our winter weather awareness page. On this page, you're going to see some links to some preparedness information, some snow ice information when it comes to measuring, and then more of our contact information. You can copy down that address, or if you have a phone, scan that QR code to save for later, or you'll see in the end there's a place you can directly go to get these links. So if you're not familiar with the National Weather Service, we're actually located here in Sioux Falls, up by the airport. If you've ever been to the north side of the city of Sioux Falls, you'll see a big white ball that's sitting there by the airport. That's our Doppler radar, and that's the radar that does provide coverage for most of the tri-state area, stretching from Chamberlain all the way down to Sioux City, all the way east over to Spencer and Spirit Lake area, as well up to the north, Marshall, Brookings, and then on to Huron. We cover 44 counties across the area and a little tiny bit of the northeastern part of Nebraska. We never like to forget about our friends down in Nebraska. We are here 24/7, 365 days of the year, which means, yes, we'll be here during the holiday season as well. We have a dedicated team of about 25 people that work in our office here, and that's a combination of meteorologists, administrative staff, and technological support staff that help keep the office running. What do we do here in the office? Well, we do a 7-day forecast. If you've ever been to weather.gov or weather.gov/Sioux Falls, you'll see a map where you can click on, or an entry place where you can put your zip code in and receive a 7-day forecast for the area. We also provide winter weather warnings, advisories, and watches for the area. So those scrollers you may see across your TV, those are coming from products that are being generated at our office here in Sioux Falls. We do special services for hydrology, river forecasts, fire weather forecasts, aviation concerns, and as well as we provide support for many of the numerous local and state partners across the area that do need our help through the year during big events. So let's talk a little bit about why winter weather awareness is important. Why are we doing this talk? It's been a slow winter season so far across the area, but that doesn't mean winter isn't going to affect us. Did you know that about 70% of the United States population lives in an area that can see snow every winter? 24% of weather-related crashes occur on roads impacted by winter conditions. There's also a monetary factor to all of this. State and local governments spend an estimated $2.3 billion each year on winter weather operations, whether that's from the materials needed to provide safe roads, or the amount of staffing, or the vehicles or the trucks needed to plow and clean our roads. Finally, no more than 1,300 people are killed every winter season due to winter weather accidents, and 117,000 people are injured every winter during to winter driving conditions. So before we can kind of get into the winter preparedness aspect of this talk, let's talk a little bit about the science. We need to know a little bit about what's typical for winter in this part of the country. Well, you can see here on the map, this is a plot of the estimated snowfall, climatological snowfall for the United States during a typical winter season. You can see that generally in the tri-state area, we average anywhere between 35 and 45 inches of snow. That's just a typical average winter. We've had several winters over the last 10 years where we've exceeded those values. We've also had a few winters where we've fallen below those values. Yeah, as you can see though, so far this winter's been pretty non-existent, and you'll see in a minute that that's not all that uncommon. Generally only a dusting of snow to as much as maybe an inch or two of snow across portions of the area. But this is why I say we're just beginning winter. The plot you're seeing here is a frequency map that shows the frequency of 1 inch or greater snowfalls throughout the winter season. You can see though, generally October, November, and through the first half of November, winter weather isn't all that common. We can actually have a slow start to the winter on a nearly average basis. Our average snowfall totals through November in this area are only 4 to 6 inches on total. But I want you to pay attention to the plot, because you'll start to notice that by December, especially mid-December, and then going through the winter season, those frequencies or those potential for those impactful snows do begin to increase. Most notably, take a look at late February, March, and April. That's actually the peak, the highest frequency of when we see at least an inch or more of snow on a given basis. The unfortunate part about winter in the Northern Plains is that it does last for quite some time, as you can see on this plot. We actually have had measurable snow and some pretty impactful snows from late April all the way into early May. The main takeaway I want you to take from this map, it can be a long winter. Even though it's been a slow start, winter does last here for quite some time. So what's winter cold typically like? We've talked about the precipitation a little bit. The map here on the left side of your screen takes a look at the average number of days, which is 1 hour in that day with a wind chill of 20 below zero or colder. Well, 14 to almost 30 days of the winter on average, we'll see at least one day or 1 hour of a day with a minus 20 wind chill. How cold does winter get on average? Well, when you just start looking at those days below freezing, on average, we do get about 55 to 60 days every winter with just your high temperature below freezing. So this is why we talk about how to prepare. It's not just the snow, but it's also the cold when you live in the northern United States. And speaking of cold air, let's talk a little bit about where our air masses tend to come from. Well, in this part of the country, we typically deal with something called the continental polar air mass. This is usually a pretty cold air mass, and it's a very dry air mass, and it originates from the central to southern parts of Canada. Pretty typical air mass that we get for most of our systems that come through the area. It provides a reasonable cold shot of air behind the storm system that moves through. The alternative to that is something called the continental Arctic air mass. And this is the very cold air mass that we'll see a handful of times each winter. This is the air mass that we see when we have a big storm coming through, and then we have a really strong high pressure move through the area. We have usually a lot of northerly winds that arrive. And this is the air mass that will give those extreme cold wind chills many times of the year. But these are the air masses that provide our cold temperatures. What about the air masses that help provide the moisture for our storm systems? Well, we typically deal with two air masses. One is the maritime polar, which originates from the Pacific Northwest. Usually the northern Pacific is its origin point. This type of air mass will usually be a part of storm systems that originate from the west or the northwest. When we start talking about our more impactful storms, we'll talk about the tracks that we see in winter soon. It's the maritime tropical. It's the air masses that originate out of the Gulf of Mexico. This is that very rich, very moist air mass that will stream up ahead of very strong, impactful storm systems. Speaking of those storm systems, where do our storms typically come from? Well, we deal with really three storm tracks across the area. We have a clipper system. Clippers are pretty common across the area. And in fact, many of our storm systems over the last few weeks have been clipper types or clipper origins. When I say origins, we name clipper systems based on where they originate from. We have such things as Alberta clippers, Saskatchewan screamers, and Manitoba maulers. Yeah, they're funny names, but those names originate from where they come from. Clipper systems are the most common systems we do see around the area. They're fast moving, they impact the area very quickly. They'll usually bring a little bit of warm air ahead of the system. They'll bring some fast precipitation to the area. And then usually behind them, like we've seen the last few weeks, we get a lot of wind and we get a little bit of cold air that comes in on the backside of the systems. Now, our more impactful storm systems come from storms that originate from the southwestern United States. Panhandle hook storms or Colorado low storms. These are the big developing storms that originate from the southwest, cross into the plains, tap into some of that warm, moist air that's out of the Gulf of Mexico that brings all that warm and very potent air to the north. These are the storms that usually bring our heaviest snowfall, and they bring potential for some wintry mix to the area. These are also some of the storms that can produce some of those very extreme high snowfall amounts because of all that moisture that's coming north, and they can usually develop some pretty good wind with them. The last type of storm track we deal with is a progressive zonal flow pattern. The zonal flow is basically a flow pattern aloft that is west to east in origin. It doesn't have much north to south variability. Systems that originate from here come from the Pacific Northwest. Again, they're usually pretty fast moving, but because of the track of the storm, they're not coming from the north and they have a slight southerly component. They can bring up some warm air, whether it's warmer air from the Pacific, or they can sometimes tap into the warmer air from the south. This can result in a little bit of an increased chance for mixed precipitation. These storms are also ones to watch because they can produce banded snowfall or localized higher snowfall amounts. So we've talked about our air masses, we've talked about our storm tracks. Let's talk a little bit about winter precipitation. Well, living here, you're going to see about everything. We see snow, sleet, freezing rain, and rain. And how we determine those things is all based on usually one factor, and that's the temperature above the ground. Now, that temperature above the ground, we sample by a combination of things, from models to atmospheric soundings, weather balloons, satellite data, and it's very critical to the forecast that we put out and how we determine what you're exactly going to see. As you can see on the right side of the screen, this is an example of a winter weather soundings or a vertical temperature profile of the atmosphere. And we look for these little things, like you can see here, a little nose of warmer air above the ground. We study these things, and then those little layers of warmer air or the little layers of colder air closer to the surface help us determine what's going to fall out of the sky. If the warm air aloft is too significant, or it's warm all the way from above the ground to the surface, you'll just see rain in many cases. If you have a little bit of warm air aloft and a lot of cold air at the surface still, you could likely see freezing rain. And then there's a chance where in the example we're seeing on the left, you could have freezing rain, or you have enough warm air aloft to just melt the snow that's falling, but enough cold air below that to refreeze it into sleet. And finally, if your whole sounding is below freezing, the answer is usually going to be snow in those cases. But not all snow is the same. You've probably heard on your local media or TV or radio, whenever you're hearing the forecast, they'll talk something about this is going to be a really wet snow, or this is going to be a really powdery snow. Well, how do we determine that? Well, this is determined by something called the snow-liquid ratio. And what the snow-liquid ratio is basically a ratio that helps us determine or measure the amount of snow that would fall for every inch of liquid that would fall. So in the examples that I've provided here, a 5-to-1 ratio would mean that for every inch of liquid precipitation, or that snow melted, you would have about 5 inches of snow. In the cases that we see really cold air coming in with a storm system, we could see snowfall ratios as high as 20-to-1. Now this is the very powdery snow, the snow that can be blown around by a leaf blower if you're trying to remove it. It's also the snow that can be very impactful to your forecast because it's the type of snow that will blow around very easily. In case you're wondering, our average snow liquid ratio in this area is 13-to-1. So we're usually a fairly typical snowfall that usually in most cases it's pretty easy to move. One of the neat things we do see around this part of the country is something called thunder snow. Now it doesn't happen all that frequently, but we do see thunder every so many years, maybe on average once a season, we'll see this. And how thunder snow forms is a pretty simple process. You'll have a warm and unstable layer of air that moves above the ground. Usually when the ground's really cold at the surface, you'll see this warmer air move over top of it. And it creates the conditions to where if you have any forcing or any upward lift in that layer, you'll create enough turbulence in the clouds and convection, enough shaking up that you'll create a static charge in that part of the cloud layer. And that static charge is released then in the form of lightning. Lightning, obviously, sometimes you're going to see it. Sometimes when that lightning flashes, it may light up the entire sky because of the reflection from all the snow in the air. But most likely, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear that rumble across the atmosphere. Why is thunder snow important in this area? Well, when you hear of the thunder snow in forecasts or you hear the potential for it, just know that this can really enhance your local snowfall rates. And we've seen in many examples that the local snowfall rates can be as high as 2 to 4 inches per hour in many cases. So that's a little bit about the science. Let's talk a little bit about the winter outlook. Now, one of the big factors, you probably hear a lot about this, we talk a lot about it when we talk about winter forecasts, something called the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO. What ENSO is a ocean atmospheric phenomena driven by water temperatures over the equator areas. As you can see here on the maps here, it's the southern part of the oceans near the equator. We help study this area and determine if the temperatures are colder or warming. When they're colder, that's considered a La Nina, and when they're warmer, that's considered an El Nino. What this does, La Nina or an El Nino, when you hear those things, just know that depending on what phase you're in, this will impact the location of the jet stream. And in the end, the location of the jet stream is pretty critical to what your temperature and precipitation patterns can be across the country for the upcoming winter season. So this year, in case you weren't aware, this is going into a typical La Nina year. Now, it doesn't look like it may be a strong La Nina year. And one thing I want to do preface with the map I'm going to show you here is La Ninas and El Nino, or the ENSO cycle, doesn't always have a reliable teleconnection or a reliable pattern recognition for the northern parts of the United States. We can apply parts of it, or we may see parts of what a typical La Nina or El Nino bring, but usually it doesn't dominate the weather pattern. But in the case of La Nina, here's typically what we see across the northern US and across North America. What you'll see is the northern jet stream, or the polar jet stream, does tend to shift northward across the Pacific. You'll tend to get a large area of high pressure across the Pacific that tends to block some storm systems. It can also shift the southern jet stream. There's normally 2 jet streams in the winter time, and it can actually shift that to produce some wetter conditions across the Pacific Northwest. But for us, the main impacts here with a La Nina, it can lead to the development of colder than normal temperatures across portions of the northern United States. But also can mean that if we're colder than normal, it can shift the highest potential for higher precip amounts further to the Great Lakes or the Ohio River Valley areas. But once again, these are typical impacts, and not every winter is going to be exactly like this. Winter's driven by a lot of different things, global patterns and teleconnections, some of which I've listed here. These are shorter term pattern recognitions and teleconnections that we can use to forecast maybe a couple weeks out in advance. Things like the Arctic Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Antarctic Oscillation, and many others across the globe that we do study. We don't have a lot of time or enough time in this talk to go into all of those, but if you're wanting to learn more, those are just a few of the terms that you can learn more about. So what does that winter look like to us? Well, recently we just updated, or NOAA and the Climate Prediction Center just updated the winter forecast for December, January, and February, which is what we consider meteorological winter. And as you can see here, for the tri-state area, generally, there's no strong signal right now. Using things like we talked about with ENSO, La Nina, generally we don't see a strong signal towards below normal temperatures or above normal temperatures. But what our winter outlooks do tend to do is we can focus on the area where our confidence is higher that we're going to see those above normal or below normal temperatures. Now, as I said, La Ninas can bring some increased potential for colder air masses to move into the area. So watch out for that as we move into the winter season. Additionally, take a look at where the precipitation outlooks are. We can kind of see that above normal trend across the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley. And that's a pretty typical La Nina pattern that may develop there. Now, I've looked a little bit further out into February, March, and even April, and the outlooks really don't change that much. Right now, we're still looking at maybe equal chances or near normal temperatures for the most part. And again, for the precipitation outlook, if there's any tendency as we move out to the second half of winter, it's that we could favor more towards below normal precipitation. But as we've all learned, weather can be dictated not just on a longer term, but it's again all those global teleconnections that we talked about a minute ago that can be the deciding factor. But what should we plan for? Now, we've looked at historical weather across the area over the last 15 or 20 years, and we've taken a look at the averages. This is pretty typical frequency. So when you throw out all the winter weather outlooks and all those kind of things, this is typically what we see every year. Winter storm watches, or the potential for those significant winter storm events, we see about 6 of those issued every year. Blizzard warnings, we see about 3 of those every winter season. Winter storm warnings, when we're expecting that highly impactful storms that are going to disrupt your lives, 6 per year. Now, winter weather advisories, they're issued more frequently. We issue winter weather advisories. You'll see this a little bit later in the talk. A little bit higher on average, about 20 per season. These are more for your nuisance events. They aren't going to majorly disrupt your life, but they're going to have maybe some minor disruptions. Finally, ice storm warnings, they are pretty rare in this part of the country, but they can happen. Less than usually 1 per year. We haven't had too many ice storm warnings over the last 5 years, but they can happen. Talking about cold, what should you plan for? Well, we've already talked about just how cold it can get in winter and how many days we have with wind chills below -20 every year. But just know that a wind chill advisory issued for wind chills colder than -25 to -35 happen about 10 times per winter season. Wind chill warnings, which are the extreme wind chill products, where you can see life-threatening conditions, frostbite in 10 minutes or less. Again, these are pretty rare, 1 to 2 per winter season, and these typically happen when we get those extreme continental Arctic air masses coming from the Arctic that filter down and affect a lot of the country. So we've talked a little bit about science in the winter, talked a little bit about the winter weather outlook and what goes into it. Let's talk about winter weather preparations. How do you stay aware, whether it's before, during, or after the storm? Number one source you can go is our webpage. www.weather.gov/Sioux Falls is one page that if you haven't bookmarked, please bookmark. There's a lot of really useful resources on this page. We'll walk through a few of these. Number one, you can see on our webpage on the left, you do have our current observation for your location or the nearest observation site for your location. Number two, you're going to see, actually 2 and 3 are kind of a combined thing. You're going to see the latest headlines. So when you're looking for a potential winter storm coming from the area, check this place out for, check this location out for if there's watches, warnings, advisories. You'll want to click on that little area on that map behind number 3. This is where you can access your 7-day forecast, and you can get more information about those winter storm products. Now, number 4 at the top, this is also a very interesting place to check because we'll usually have information about that incoming storm at the top of our web page. We'll also have a page we're going to talk about in just a little bit called the Winter Weather Resources page. Number 5 and number 6 at the bottom of the page. Number 5 contains something we call a weather story. Now, weather stories are things or graphics we do every day, a couple times of the day to help give a visual overview of what the weather is going to be like. But this is also where you're going to find some of the graphics we also put on social media. Number 6 is the last thing if you need to check the radar. If you don't have an app on your phone that does radar, you can also get that radar from our web page. Speaking of mobile options, now we know everyone out there probably has a favorite weather app that they use, and weather apps are great. There's a lot of really, really good weather apps out there. Unfortunately, right now, the National Weather Service does not have an app. We do have what we continue to maintain is a mobile web page. So if you go to mobile.weather.gov, type that into your phone's browser, you can actually bookmark that page, depending if you have an Android or an iPhone. You can save that page as a bookmark or an icon to your screen. Once you do that, then you can enter in your zip code into the searches, and it can bring up the same things as you'll get at our web page: a forecast, radar, satellite. You can read our discussions, and you can also see if we have any headlines in effect for the area. So going back a little bit to one of those pages I mentioned, the Winter Weather Resources page located at the top of our web page. This is a one-stop shop we've tried to put together for as many of the winter weather resources that you might need during the winter season ahead. It's going to contain things like your snowfall forecast, your watch and warning maps. You can also access recent snowfall reports, a page or a map that you can see where the snow has fallen and what reports we've received in. You can also access our social media feeds from this page as well. A neat feature we have at the bottom is some bookmarked links for some of the larger cities across the area, where you can see an hour-by-hour forecast for your location. Once again, you can bookmark this page. You can use your phone, scan the QR code, and save this page if you want to save it for future reference. On this page, though, there's a really neat thing. This probabilistic snowfall page link will take you to some more advanced data, something we've been working on over the last few years. A way of incorporating probabilistic data, which is probabilistic data is a fancy way of saying a whole lot of weather models run with different characteristics, kind of thrown together and adjusted with our forecast and some of the science that we've learned about ensemble data to produce some of these graphics. Now on this page, you're going to see such things as probabilities for certain thresholds of snow. So if you're a decision maker and you need to know how much snow or what the chance of 2 inches of snow is or 6 inches of snow is, this is a great page to find some of those visuals. You'll see some bar graphs there where you can access the potential for certain levels of snowfall for your city's location. And you'll also see some charts where if you're a decision maker, you want to know what the low end snowfall forecast is, or maybe the extreme high end snowfall that you might see out of this event. This is where you can see some of those numbers and information as well. Again, we're going to be experimenting with this data. We've kind of started over the last year or so, 2 years, learning of different ways to communicate this data. So if you have any feedback and you see this stuff on our social media pages, feel free to comment and let us know what you think about it. One tool I wanted to talk about today, which is also located on that Winter Weather Resources page, is something called the Winter Storm Severity Index. Now, this is a big fancy way of saying, or it's a big fancy index that helps put all of these things like snow and how heavy the snow is, and is there blowing snow or ground blizzards or temperature extremes. It helps us put it all into context. So it takes the number games out of the forecast, and it combines our forecast and climatology and local resources like terrain and topography to help put the forecast into context. So maybe an advisory event or a low-end event may only produce minor impacts for the area. This is a helpful product to help gauge the potential impact a storm may have on your area. So we really encourage you to check it out this winter season. You're going to see it more in our products on social media and our webpage. And just know that it's more sophisticated than just a snowfall forecast because of all of the different ways we can put the weather forecast into context. So how do you stay aware? By knowing the terms that you're going to see in the winter season. Here are just a few things that you might hear during the winter season. A hazardous weather outlook. Something that if you click on our website right now, you're going to see a few different things. You're going to see a watch, you're going to see warnings, and you're going to see a part of the area highlighted with a hazardous weather outlook. What the hazardous weather outlook is kind of like your early heads up product. It's a generalized outlook that we issue for all 7 days of the forecast that will highlight the potential for hazardous weather across the area. It's a good first guess to check to maybe see if we're talking about a winter storm or potential for fire weather or dangerous cold heading for the area. But you might also hear the term a watch, winter storm watch. This is a term when you hear watch, we want you to think of begin being ready. It's time to prepare because we're giving you a heads up that we really see that an impactful winter storm could be heading our way. And it's time for you to start paying attention to it. And it's time for you to maybe start making those adjustments to your plans. When you hear the term advisory means use caution. We're expecting conditions in the area, an incoming winter storm coming into the area. That's not going to majorly disrupt your life, but minor disruptions are possible. You could have some delays. You're going to have some road issues, maybe some travel issues. Mainly, it's a heads up to use caution. Most times in advisory, you're going to be able to travel. But unlike what you're going to see in the final phrase here, warning, when you see the word warning, in effect, this is our cue to you to take action. This means winter weather is on its way. Winter weather and highly impactful winter weather is heading your way to the area. When you see warnings in effect, know that you're likely going to be dealing with something that's going to have some major disruptions to your everyday life. There may be cancellations, there may be significant delays, there may be things impacting your life in a major sense. So speaking of all of these headlines, what are the winter weather thresholds? Now, I've kind of broken this down into two sections, a warning section and an advisory section. Now for winter storm warnings, which is, again, we see about 6 times a year, just know that when we're talking about snow, 6 inches of snow in this area typically will fall in a warning, and we'd like to have that fall within 12 hours. Now, we can have longer duration winter storm warnings, but in those cases, we tend to look for 8 inches of snow over a 24-hour period. But just also know that winter storm warnings can be issued for a combination of things. You know, we could have 6 inches of snow and a lot of wind, or snow and a combination of significant freezing rain or sleet. Winter storm warnings, again, mean that highly impactful winter storm conditions are heading your way. Blizzard warnings, again, blizzard warnings on average 3 times a year in this part of the country. The difference with a blizzard warning is that there's a little bit more criteria involved. As we all know, blizzards need strong winds, but we like to quantify those winds. So in a case of a blizzard warning, we need wind gusts frequently greater than 35 miles per hour. But we also just can't have the wind. We also need visibility. Typically, we want to see visibility less than a quarter of a mile. Those are those whiteout conditions that we talk about during a blizzard. And again, just because it's a blizzard warning, or it may feel like a blizzard warning outside, doesn't mean you might see a blizzard warning, because we need those conditions to last for a longer duration in time. We like to see blizzard conditions for 3 hours or more before we'll issue a blizzard warning. Ice storm warnings are issued when we start to see ice accumulations greater than a quarter of an inch. When we start to see ice accumulations over a half an inch, then we begin running into some significant impacts across the area. Wind chill warnings, again, are those high-end warnings when we have significant cold air coming into the area. Wind chills colder than minus 35. Winter weather advisories, again, this is that nuisance winter weather that we've kind of seen. We saw one of these already earlier this fall season. We'll issue them in this area for snow amounts generally 2 inches to 3 inches over a 12-hour period. You may have some impacts like we saw with wind. You might see an advisory issued for mixed precipitation, snow, sleet, freezing rain, generally less than a quarter of an inch will cause a winter weather advisory to be issued. And again, winter weather advisories are for those nuisance winter weather events that aren't going to provide major disruptions but more nuisance disruptions. Finally, winter weather or wind chill advisories. We see these about 10 times per winter season. Wind chills -25 to -35. One last thing we wanted to talk to you a little bit about here. A newer product over the last couple of years, a snow squall warning. We don't typically issue a lot of snow squall warnings in this part of the country, but just know that if you do hear the phrase, they're a short fuse product. Short fuse means they're usually short-term duration. They only last 30 to maybe 60 minutes at most. Kind of similar to severe weather season, severe thunderstorm warnings typically last only 30 to 60 minutes. Now, snow squall warnings are issued when we have a sudden onset of stronger winds and localized visibility drops, usually accompanied with moderate to heavy snow, very brief moderate to heavy snow. These snow squall warnings are issued to kind of give an advanced heads up that some really dangerous but short-lived conditions may be heading your way. But one thing that makes snow squall warnings unique is that they will tone alert on weather radios, and they will alert most of your cell phones through the wireless emergency alert system if you have that activated on your phones. Now, if you run into a snow squall warning, just know that a couple of things. They're short-lived. Those conditions aren't going to last forever, but those conditions can be pretty significant. Try to exit the highway safely if you can. Reduce your speed. You know, if you can't find an exit to get off the highway or interstate, pull as far off to the road as you can and let the snow squall pass. And also increase your following distance as much as you can. Another thing, very, very important, especially with social media in this day and age, you're going to see forecasts out there on social media and other platforms that are going to be from some pretty crazy forecasts at times. It's really easy nowadays to take raw model data that's 10 days out or longer out there and throw that out there as a forecast. You'll see a lot of unreliable sources out there using this kind of information to generate buzz and clicks and likes. One thing we want you to do this winter season, verify your source. Make sure it's a distinguished and trustworthy source. Avoid clickbait. Think before you share. Make sure you know where that information is coming from. Be wary of exaggerated forecasts. If you see a page out there that's talking about extreme deadly cold or massive crippling storm that's 10 days away from now, be wary of it. Don't share those forecasts if you don't have to. Check for the dates and the times in your graphics. Double check the date to see when that forecast has been issued or when that forecast has been updated. Make sure you're just not looking at somebody's model graphic that they're throwing out there and taking that as the final answer. And again, maintain your situational awareness. We've talked about some of the ways that you can do this, checking our website, checking with your local news. And that kind of brings me to the fact that these are some of your reliable sources. National Weather Service, your local media outlets, absolutely check them on a routine basis. National media outlets, and any reliable weather apps that are out there. The biggest thing takeaway here, if you hear about it, double check your sources. Make sure it's legitimate where you're getting your information from. So we talked about ahead of the storm, staying aware. Now let's stay safe. What can you do before, during, and then after the storm? Hopefully, you've done some of these things in your home. If you're expecting a winter storm or know that winter weather could impact the area, have you checked your medications? Don't get into the position where you're down to your last 1 or 2 medications that you might need and you can't get to the store because the roads are too bad or the storm was worse than expected and you just can't get to where you need to go. Have your food supplies. Have you checked your food supplies in case the travel is expected to be limited or not possible with the storm? Say a big blizzard is coming into the area or a major winter storm that will bring a lot of snow. That doesn't mean go out and clear the grocery shelves for every winter weather advisory that's out there. In most cases, this isn't necessary. But if a major winter storm is impacted into the area, it's good to know what's available. Do those things before the storm arrives, like checking your furnace vents are not blocked. This is especially important in the dead of winter, and maybe in a winter we've had a lot of winter weather or we've had a lot of ice or those kind of things. Blocked vents are a major cause of concerns. Check your shovels, snow blowers, make sure everything is working before the snow arrives. Make sure your family is aware of what to do. Change any plans if needed. If you have a storm in the forecast, make sure you're checking the forecast routinely. A few things you want to check. Make sure that you have in your home before the storm arrives. Here's a list on the right-hand side of your screen. Shovel, salt, flashlights, batteries in case the power goes out. You may want to check for candles. You may want to have some bottled water just in case. Have extra blankets, warm clothing available. One thing people never think about is your cell phone. So if you're expecting or there's the potential for power outages, make sure you have your cell phone charged. Make sure you have a battery pack, something that can help charge your phone in case the power does go out. In your vehicles, a few simple things. It's been an easy winter so far. Maybe not many of you have had these things in your vehicles yet. Get an emergency kit out there. Get a safety kit. Check your fluids. Test your wiper blades. Make sure they can clean adequately. Make sure your vehicle is winter safe for the roads. Fill your vehicles with gas ahead of a winter storm in case you can't get out into the future, or in the case of extreme cold behind the winter storm. If you need to travel, in the cases of a winter storm or extreme cold, having a tank of gas that's at least half full is important. Get your shovel and that scraper in your vehicle if at all possible, or if you haven't done so yet. And also traveling, monitor your forecasts. A few things you want to get in that emergency kit: flashlights, bags of sand or salt, blankets, especially important, jumper cables. Do you have a cell phone charger in your car? Do you have a way that if you are stranded, you can charge your cell phone or your way of communications? Also, preparing before the storm. If you're dealing with work or an employer or school, make sure you know your employer's policies when it comes to winter weather. For kids out there, make sure you know where to find your school closure information. Make sure you've signed up for those texting services if your school provides them, or any of the other services that provide that kind of notification service. Mainly know where to find more information on the forecast or what's ahead. So once the storm arrives, here are a few things you can do to stay safe. What we always tell people: when the snow starts falling, if you don't have to go out, don't. Now that's not always feasible because many of us do work and many of us have to get places for our everyday life. But just know that in extreme cases of winter weather, the fewer vehicles you can get on the road means that the roads can get cleared faster, and that keeps yourself and those emergency vehicles out of harm's way so they don't have to rescue you. Monitor your forecast if at all possible. Make sure you're staying up to date, because even though the snow starts falling, the last forecast you saw may not be the most recent forecast, or may not be the end results. Continue to check those monitoring devices. Make sure those smoke carbon monoxide detectors are working, especially that's the case if you have to use alternative heat sources to keep your home warm. Finally, have a plan before winter weather threatens. Make sure you've communicated. Make sure that you're also checking to see those travel plans. And if you're traveling longer distances, make sure that you're checking the travel plans on your route. So if you do have to hit the roads, a couple things, easy things you can do to stay safe when traveling in a storm. Number one thing that most people don't do: drive to the conditions. Number two, slow down. That's probably the biggest cause of many of the accidents out in the areas. People need to slow down when you're on the roads. You don't know where the roads are icy. You don't know when you might lose control of your vehicle, or hit a spot or hit a bump in the road that could cause you to lose control. Maintain plenty of following distance. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. But when you're following, make sure you have enough distance to stop in case the vehicle in front of you needs to stop. Also important, if you can't see on the roads like you see in this example of this video, pull over. Get as far off the road as you can. If you're on the interstate, try to get off the interstate, find the nearest exit. The last thing you want to do is stop in the middle of the road and then be rear-ended by somebody who isn't driving to conditions. And if you're traveling out in a winter storm, always let others know where you're headed and the route that you're taking when you get there. We talked a little bit about stopping distance. Here's a slide I wanted to show you. Did you know that in winter, stopping distances can increase by almost 10 times in winter weather? So in this example, for a car traveling 35 miles an hour, which is your typical city speed limit in a lot of cases, on a dry road, it'll only take you 60 to maybe 100 feet to stop with good tires and good braking systems. When you get a packed snow road, that distance is already 180 feet. And when you have an icy road, you might need 600 feet or more. So we want you to always remember to leave plenty of space between you and the vehicle ahead. Thinking about braking and then being able to brake are very important when it comes to winter driving. And this also, another point we kind of want to make here, and this is from a study done out of the National Weather Service in Milwaukee and with the Wisconsin DOT. Don't let your guard down during light snowfall events. You know, in the dead of the winter, when most of us are used to driving in snow, maybe it's not as big of an issue. But the first snows of the season, when we get those light snowfall amounts, those are the amounts that we often take for granted. As in the examples that you can see here, the vast majority of accidents in the Milwaukee and Madison area came from the very light snowfall amounts. So what do you do when your car gets stuck? Because it could happen when you're out and about and driving. The number one, obviously, if you have a cell phone with you or way of communicating, call for help. But we want you to be careful. That doesn't mean if you're in the car and you don't have a charger and you don't know how long it's going to take for somebody to get to you, don't sit on the phone as long as you can. Try to conserve your phone battery because you may need to make additional calls for help. Stay in your vehicle. It's important that when you're stuck in the car, you know, if you're in the city and you're stuck on the side of the road, sure, get out, go to the nearest gas station, call for help, do what you need. But if you're out in the country, you're out in the middle of an area where there aren't towns nearby or there's not a lot of residents nearby, stay in your vehicle. You don't want to get stranded out there in a winter storm. That's put yourself in more danger. But if you're stuck in your vehicle and you think you're going to be there a while, try to start your vehicle every 10 minutes to provide some heat for you. But just be careful that if you're in the case of a deep snowbank or you go into the ditch and you might, you might be in deeper snow than you'd like to be in, check that your exhaust is free from snow. Because while that vehicle is running, it's possible that you could have carbon monoxide filter into your vehicle. So we kind of recommend if you're in that situation, you have to start your vehicle for heat, crack a window in your car just to get a little fresh air into the car every so often. So if you do get stranded, being visible is extremely important to rescuers. Now that's in case if you're stranded out in the middle of the country or at night or in really poor driving conditions. If somebody needs to get to you, they need to be able to find you. Turn on your dome light intermittently at night while you're running your vehicle. You know somebody's getting nearby. That helps them see you. Tie a piece of brighter cloth or reflective cloth on an antenna, or in a lot of vehicles nowadays, you might have to tie that to your side mirrors or anything. The main thing is get something out there that people can notice. After the snow stopped and say you're still stuck out there, raise your vehicle hood to help signal that you might need help. And this could happen just when you're driving in normal conditions. A lot of times if your hood is raised, you'll be more likely to get help if you don't have a way for calling for help. If I'm stranded outside, now this is a rare case, but it can happen. The one thing we want you to do is try to find shelter. You know, if you're out in the woods, you get stuck in the woods, you get stuck, you have to go walk somewhere in the storm, try to find somewhere nearby. That might be a residence, that might be a barn, something that can get you out of the wind and out of the elements to some degree. If there's no shelter, then you're going to have to try to build one, and that's hard to do. Any protection from the wind is important. You may have to build a shelter near a tree or using some branches that you find. The main thing is you want to get out of the elements if you're not going to be able to be rescued for a while. If you have the tools and you're able to, not everyone has this ability, try to build a fire. Use warm rocks for heat. Melt your snow if you have the ability to melt snow. Because the one thing you want to be careful of when you're stranded outside, whether it's in a winter storm or whether you're just stranded hiking in the woods in the winter time, be careful of eating too much snow because it lowers your body temperature. And that's the last thing you want to do in order to avoid things like hypothermia. You might not think about this when you're out and stranded outside, but exercise. Keep your body moving. Jumping jacks, whatever you can do to keep your arms moving, your legs moving, helps build that internal core temperature, helps keep blood flowing to your hands and to your feet. If the power goes out, what do you do? Well, the main thing we want you to do is stay inside. Not a lot you can do when the power goes out. Conserve the heat. Close off any of the unneeded rooms in your area or in your house. Close the door to those bedrooms. Close blinds or curtains to help kind of insulate your house as much as you can. You want to keep the core of your house warm as long as you can, because you don't know how long the power could be out in your residence. Eat and drink. This may sound kind of silly, but eating and drinking helps keep that metabolism going and helps keep that body burning energy. It helps keep your body warmer. Use electronic devices sparingly. Again, we've talked about the potential for losing power and needing the ability to contact people. If you have a cell phone or iPad or those kind of devices, tablets, make sure you have them charged up before, when you're dealing with winter storms or the potential for power outages. But also think about having that extra battery pack that you could rely on to help, boost your power if you need to. And lastly, if the power is out for a while and you think it's going to be out for a while, layer your clothing up. Do like you would do if you were heading outside, because again, it's important that if your house isn't going to stay warm and you can't get anywhere to get into a warmer environment, you're going to have to learn how to, prepare for the elements that you could be expected, and cold will be one of those. So after the storm, if you do have to venture out, the number one thing you can do is monitor your road conditions. Make sure you don't go out too early if you don't have to. This gives some time for roads to be cleaned. It gives plows the opportunity to clear those roads. When you're on the road zone, you have to go out. Try to give those plows plenty of space. Now, you've heard the saying, don't crowd the plow. Well, that's extremely important, because those guys are out there, those folks are out there doing their best to try to get life back to normal. If you're shoveling your driveway, your area, a couple of things to remember: push that snow. Don't lift it as much as you can, especially if you're dealing with a really heavy, wet snow. Wear good boots. You want to avoid things like frostbite on your toes. Take frequent breaks. Shoveling, and especially shoveling heavy, wet snow, one of the major factors for things like heart attacks and other health-related issues during the winter season. Take breaks and stay hydrated during those breaks. Your body is using a lot of energy. You want to try to stay warm, and you don't have to do it all at once. You want to make sure you get it done, but you want to make sure it gets done safely. If you do need to travel, 511 is a good resource to call. Safe Travel USA is also a good website to check on the road conditions in many of the states around us. We've kind of talked about this a little bit. Be wary of cold exposure. Frostbite is an injury we see a lot in this part of the country. A lot of times it can lead to people, or it can affect people before they even realize they have frostbite. You start noticing being outside too much, and you start noticing some tingling in your fingers, or maybe your skin color is turning a shade of white, or maybe a little bit yellow. That might mean you already have some of those first signs of frostbite in the area. You're going to want to take some precautions, get indoors, slowly warm up those areas affected. The other thing we want to be concerned about is hypothermia. What is hypothermia? Well, it's technically an abnormally low body temperature. It's when you've been exposed to the cold so long that your body your body temperature gets so cold that you're starting to shut down your body. You may see some of these warning signs like confusion or extreme shivering, or some cases you go from extreme shivering to not shivering at all. Difficulty speaking, becoming really sleepy, really lethargic, and even some of those muscles, arms and legs, may become stiff and unable to move. If you're already at this point, you already need medical attention, serious medical attention at that point. Remember, wind chill advisories. Frostbite can occur in usually 30 minutes or less in these cases. So when we have an advisory, be sure you're dressing to the conditions. Be sure you're wearing those layers. Wind chill warnings, those extreme products, those extreme temperatures, minus 35 or colder, frostbite in 10 minutes or less to exposed skin. So again, these are the conditions we really want you to be careful of. What are you going to do after the storm to help us out, to find more about the weather? Well, measuring and reporting is one of those things that can really help us out here at the National Weather Service. So the basics of snow measuring, and generally it's a pretty simple process, just takes a few things. Number one, and the most important thing, try to find a flat, unsheltered area away from buildings, areas that are typically free of drifts and you don't see bare spots when the wind, you have extreme cases of wind. Avoid measuring under trees or elevated surfaces such as decks or patio overhangs. These can have some effects on the snow totals that you'll have. Here at the National Weather Service, we utilize a snowboard. You don't have to use a snowboard if you don't want to, but you can also make your own. Take a piece of plywood, use that, put that out into your designated area that's flat and unsheltered. If you have the availability, try to paint that snowboard white. That does help reduce the potential for melting or a significant loss of snow on that board due to some of the impacts of maybe sun or solar radiation on that board. Use a ruler or yardstick. That's pretty self-explanatory. Stick the ruler into the snow until you hit your flat surface. Ensure that ruler perpendicular to the ground. This is one of the common measuring errors we see. And also, you're going to have to probably get down and read that snow at the ground level. Why do we say that? Well, if you're tilting your ruler or you're maybe measuring from looking down on it, you can actually misrepresent the measurement that you're seeing. You can be too high or too low. One thing you want to do, take multiple measurements, not just one measurement. Try to find a few different surfaces and then add those measurements up and then average those readings. And that's really a more representative snowfall measurement for your area. So speaking of that, where should I measure thing? This is a really difficult one. Try to find, again, that open area away from obstructions, trees, buildings, anything that could block the wind or maybe enhance the wind in the area. There's a general rule of thumb that we like to use. Try to find the area where you measure that's twice as far away from the nearest obstruction. So for example, if your home is 25 feet tall or you have a tree that's 25 feet tall near where you want to measure, you want to be at least 50 feet away from that. That helps avoid those blocking of snow or wind enhancements that can affect snowfall measurements. Try to avoid drifts. If your area is susceptible to drifts or your backyard likes to fill in with snow from nearby fences or other yards, that may not be the most representative area. You can kind of see on the example here, stay away from those rooftops, stay away from those picnic tables underneath trees. But if that picnic table is out in the middle of your yard or well away from those obstructions, that is a good spot. You don't have to have a snowboard in that case. You have a flat surface that isn't usually conducive of melting. Just a few measuring questions here that we kind of see during the winter season. Can I measure from my deck or my patio? Well, sometimes that is the case. You have to really know your area that you're measuring. In the case of very light winds, this may be okay because that snow will typically fall straight down. But in the case of any wind, decks and patios can be nearby roofs or nearby surfaces that can cover them. And this can a lot of times maybe locally enhance that snowfall that you're seeing on your porch or your patio. Can I measure on the grass? Again, this is kind of a dependent. If your grass is really flattened after the winter, you might be possible, but generally we try to tell people to avoid measuring directly on the grass because you can actually falsely heighten your snowfall total because you're gonna have that want to stick the ruler into the ground all the way to your hard surface. And that hard surface may be actually accounting for like 1.5 inches or 2 inches of grass that you might be falsely measuring. Can I measure on concrete or blacktop? And again, this is a sometimes. The problem with these surfaces is that depending on your temperature, depending on, say, if you have some late day sun, you can actually start to see melting because the surfaces can be at a different temperature than your other surfaces. And it can result in some lower snowfall totals. Well, I always measure in the same location. Well, not necessarily. Again, we want to find a location where the drifting is minimal. We want to use our best judgment though. So if you've done measuring in the past and you have a good feel for this is where an accurate area is, then that's your area. That's where you measure. But there may be cases where you have a lot of wind where you have to start going out and taking multiple measurements and try to average that out. It can be extremely difficult to measure drifting snow. And a lot of times in drifting snow, you're going to have to kind of take a lot of estimates across your yard and kind of, guesstimating is a bad word, but you're going to have to estimate. You're going to have to make some of those estimations. Now, ice is also a common thing in this area, not as common obviously as snow, but it's pretty easy to measure. Flat ice is pretty much what it is. It's an ice accumulation on a flat surface. It's pretty easy to measure. You use a ruler or tape measure and just measure to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. Try to repeat this ice measurement on as many surfaces as you can. Make sure you're taking that measurement at eye level, and then again make an average and report that average. Radial ice is also something you can measure. This is the ice accumulation on, say, a tree branch or a round surface, a wire. Use a tree branch or a shrub. It's usually pretty representative. The example here you can see shows what you should kind of do. So ice accumulates usually on the top and the bottom differently. So your rainfall will fall on the top and then it will end up accumulating or freezing to a thicker surface on the bottom of the object that it's freezing on. So what you want to do is measure both of those things. Measure the top of the ice of the object and measure the ice on accumulation on the bottom of the object. Then you're going to add those two things together and you're going to divide by 2 to get your average ice accumulation. Now, we've talked a little bit about how to measure, but information we receive from spotters out there and members of the public and anyone who has an interest in winter weather is really critical to help us change the winter weather forecast that you're seeing and help modify the forecast. One of these apps we really like out there is called MPing. You can use the QR code that'll take you to the web page where you should be able to select the option to download this app. It's a completely anonymous app, but what it does is you can load the app, enter in a GUI in your system, and then select what you're seeing out there. When you select what you're seeing out there and hit the submit button, it will ingest into a map usually, and we can ingest that data right into our systems here in the National Weather Service. This helps gives us an idea as far as what precipitation is falling on the radar at the time. The good thing is it's completely anonymous. Again, you can report as often as you'd like to. The one thing you have to know it's only for currently falling precipitation. It's not for measurements. How do you report measurements? Well, we really encourage you to sign up for something called COCORAS. It's a collaborative project that's out there. It's I think they were at many thousand reports, over 30,000 at least. On average now across the country. And it's basically a volunteer program where you can get entered into the system and then you can enter in daily reports for precipitation across the area. We then take these reports and make fancy maps, or we share this information with the media to help report what happens during winter weather, or in some cases during rainfall events, or even during significant weather events such as hail. Other reporting systems you can use, and I'll show you the example here of the first link that you're going to see. There's a link on our webpage that I'll show you that you can report directly from the National Weather Service. But here are a couple other things. You can email us directly, nws.siouxfalls@noaa.gov. Social media, we're extremely active on social media during our winter weather events, and we love to hear reports when we post information. You can call our office. This is our public phone line. It is answered 24 hours a day. You can provide your winter weather report at that point. And like everything when you're doing these reports, photos always welcome. We love to see what's happening out there, and also your location. We need to know where you're reporting from when you submit a report. Speaking of reporting online, I told you a little bit about something on our website. If you go to our website, again, weather.gov/Sioux Falls, and look for the current hazards drop-down menu, you'll see something called Submit a Storm Report. This will open up another web page which will allow you to report various weather information. This can be winter weather, or this can be severe weather, damage that you've seen. It'll walk you through a few different GUIs where you can select, for example, the time that you're making your snowfall measurement. If you measured or you estimated it, you can provide some comments as far as what you're seeing in your backyard. If you're doing it on a device or on a computer, it can actually use your device's location. That will help pinpoint us in our computer systems as far as where your report's coming from. And then we receive those reports. You can enter in your contact information if you want to be contacted about it, but you can completely do it anonymously as well. We receive those reports as a pop-up into our computer systems, and we're alerted right away to that report coming in. So we're kind of wrapping up here. I wanted to share some really nice winter weather resources that we've created over the last year. These are again linked on our winter weather resources page, as well as our winter awareness pages. You can see a couple little printouts. If you want to, you can save them as a PDF on your computer, or you can print them out, but they'll walk you through, again, reminders of what the terminology is, some simple things to do before, during, and after the storm. We'll talk you through, again, how to measure snow and how to report, where to report. And we'll also provide you, again, with links to those winter weather resources pages and some things that you may want to bookmark for future reference to stay, again, weather aware and weather prepared as we move through the upcoming winter season. Lastly, I want to thank everyone here for listening, and I hope it's been very informative. I hope we've helped prepare you and we've helped get you ready for the winter season ahead. I know it's been a very slow start to the winter season, but as we talked about earlier, winter season is just beginning, and we're likely going to see a long winter season ahead of us. Once again, if you want to contact me, if you have further questions or any questions from this talk, want to learn a little bit more about winter weather, my contact information is up there. You can also scan that QR code once again if you want to go to our winter weather resources page. I want to thank our warning coordination meteorologist, Peter Rogers. He's our primary point of contact when it comes to winter weather safety and preparedness, safety preparedness for all kinds of seasons for the area. And again, you can contact us at our phone. In case you aren't familiar with it, you can get our forecast via the phone as well. At 605-330-4444 number will give you a daily forecast and the current conditions. And in the wintertime, in case you didn't know this, we do actually update that phone line for the current snowfall during a snowfall event at the Sioux Falls Airport. Last but not least, just another final plug for www.weather.gov, our webpage where you can get your local forecasts and stay aware and prepared for the season ahead. So with that said, we'll wrap up here tonight. I want to thank you for listening here tonight. You can view this talk anytime you want, as we'll be providing this link here on our webpage after our winter weather season. And again, if you know anybody who you would think would be interested in this talk, share this talk with them, share the page. We have another class actually coming up here on December 7th, and that is afternoon class. So if you know somebody who's interested in winter weather, want them to learn more about it, highly recommend you sharing this talk with them. So once again, I'm going to close out here for tonight. Thank you for attending, and be safe this winter, and have a great night.